In this final lesson, I want to talk to you about kind of the fun stuff. We've already talked about feel, and we've already talked about tone, and we've talked about parts, and I've given you, a base for how to approach playing rhythm, a base for how to approach playing piano lead, and now I want to talk to you about the fun stuff, which are effects. And this is all stuff you should add after the fact. Because it's, you never want to rely on effects so much that you can't play the piano, and that, you want your playing and your playing to actually be the main focus, and that no matter what, you sound great when you're just playing a great sounding piano. But after all that, we have effects, which most of these keyboards have gobs of them. This, I'm using my computer, but this is a Nord Electro, and there's tremolo, pan, ring mod, Ottawa, flanger, and reverb, and everything else under the sun. But I think there are a few key ones that are a lot of fun to play with as a piano player. And one of those is reverb, which we've talked a lot about. One of those is a filter, and one of those is delay. And then, of course, the one I've been talking about this whole time, which is compression. But we already hit that, so I'm going to move on. Compression makes the piano sound awesome. The end. So first one I want to talk about is reverb. Now, we talked about reverb already, which is that trail that's happening when I hit the key. But the cool thing is, if you have the right, interface in your keyboard, or you set it up right or whatever, you can control how much reverb is on a keyboard. And I've done this before on motifs and on phantoms. Right now I'm using my computer. But so, for example, if I turn up the wet dry level on the reverb to where it's half reverb, half signal, sounds like this. Which, which has its own vibe in and of itself. A lot of the ways I use this is in really small hits. Right, where if you didn't have it, it'd just be. So you can turn the reverb up, and it really adds a lot of vibe, where, in some of those soft moments, or maybe on the tail ends of verses, or maybe even as a hook, sometimes, it just sounds nice. And, sometimes you want a little more reverb on your whole notes. You can be playing that, but maybe you want it to be a little more reverb. The difference is subtle, but what I find is these are the things that really separate the songs out. If every song has the same piano patch and has the same feel, then it ends up getting monotonous. And so you can get the set and maybe the record or whatever you're doing spiced up a little bit by adding some stuff, and reverb's one of those things. So, a lot airier. But it still kind of works. And part of that's finding the right reverb sound. One of the keys is there's a reverb called a mod reverb. And what that is it's essentially simulating. We talked about reverb is a room that it's simulating. Well, picture a room made out of like metal or something, or actually it doesn't matter, just a wood or metal room or something. And every time your signal bounces off one of those walls, it detunes 1 cent. So it doesn't end up with this really flat sounding, perfect sounding reverb. It ends up with this really full, kind of almost has a little bit of a chorus effect to it. It's a really great reverb to have. Now, if you don't have that in your keyboard, most of them don't, what you can do is Boss makes a pedal called the RV5, and it's specifically that pedal, and that pedal has a mod reverb setting on it, and we use that. It's on a lot of the recordings up until the last year or two. That pedal's all over it, and it was kind of my go-to thing for a while until I got into computer audio, where I can program it all myself and figure it all out. So it has a great mod reverb, which gives you this kind of full sound. Now, the other thing you can do with reverb that's really interesting is all of a sudden your piano can turn into a pad if you turn it up all the way. So you can kind of be doing. So you can add in a couple of effects, and I've found that sometimes it's nice if you're playing a pattern to automate the reverb. And automation is a studio term where you're turning it up by drawing it in, but you can automate live, and what that really means is turn a knob. So if you're playing a part, back to one of our patterns. You might automate it back down. And all I'm doing is turning a knob up and down, and that's it. And so anyway, it's a great tool to have. The next effect is delay. Delay is more commonly known as an echo, but what a delay is actually doing is repeating a sound. And there are different kinds of delays. You have like tape delays and analog delays and whatever. Don't need to get into that. They all have their own sound. If you get online, I'm sure you can YouTube, different types of delay, and there'll be 10,000 results of whatever. But so basically, a delay can add a lot of rhythm to something. Sounds something like this, right? And one of the ways I've used that before is a line that I wrote goes like this. Which by itself isn't necessarily awesome, because I wrote it first on a synth, but I wanted that piano to chime in with it. And so, but the piano chime didn't quite work right. So what I did was very simply add delay. So when I play it now, which is a lot of fun. And there's lots of other ways you can do delay. You can make it to where it starts rhythmically going nuts, and that's kind of the U2 guitar thing that they kind of everyone does now, but I typically stay away from that. And the final effect that we talk about is that I use a lot is a filter. And it's not necessarily an effect, I suppose, although it's probably the most misused term in all of keyboard history, right next to spacey. And so a filter is basically a really dramatic EQ. And we hear filter and think of something crazy like a synth sweep or something going zzz, 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 and that's not really what a filter is. A filter is a lot more simple than that. You take an EQ, make it really dramatic, and then you can sweep and say where it's at. So you can cut out all of the low end or all of the high end, and it will sound way dramatically different. So in this filter I'm using, it's a low pass filter, which means all the high end's gone, only the low end is passing through, and it sounds like this. Right, so now it's only the really low coming through. As I sweep it back up, there's you can hear it kind of doing that. Well, it's great for doing stuff that's, kind of ambient sounding maybe. And then you can add the reverb on top of it, and really simple, or maybe that's how you want to do those kind of hits. And it's just another piece of depth. And the great thing about a filter, and I cover this a lot more in the other class I'm doing about sounds, but the great thing about a filter is you're able to really dynamically change sounds over time. If we take the pattern I've been using over the last couple lessons and filter it, we can slowly sweep that filter up, and it creates a pretty neat effect. So it sounds kind of like this. So it's a pretty cool effect to use. It's one of those things that if you do that in a section, that's almost like building, that builds the song in and of itself, because it's slowly adding more. Never takes anything away. So all that low end's there, and you're adding the high end. Creates a really nice effect in the house. So yeah, go ahead and take time and look at your keyboard and find out what effects it has and find out what uses you can get out of them. Specifically, find great reverb patches. Find a couple of them that you can use. Maybe pick up a Boss RV5 pedal. They're really cool if you just have a keyboard. If you're using a computer rig, just kind of spend some time on your reverb unit. Because a lot of the computer reverbs sound too good, and you kind of have to find a way to dirty it up a bit and make it a little darker and a little weirder. And after that, get your reverb patch down, play with it, assign it to something that you can really, whether it's on your keyboard on a knob or it's on a controller, assign it so that you can turn it up and down, and kind of play around with that and see what it feels like, see how you see what moves you, and see what kind of what makes a difference in your playing. Find a delay and kind of have that accessible. The cool thing about these keyboards is that most of them have a master tempo in them, so you should be able to find one delay patch or maybe two delay patches that you can use across any song, and all you have to do is change the tempo, which if you're playing to a click, which I hope you are, the drummer should be able to give you the tempo, or the person who's in charge of the click should be able to give you a tempo. And then, some of you might not be able to access a filter. I think that's the only effect that's not on this doodad right here. But the majority of them, I know all the tritons and motifs and phantoms do, and any computer does, because it's a basic function of an EQ is filtering. And so find a filter and assign that to a knob and use that too, because it'll really, these tools really add to spicing up an otherwise normal instrument. So we can take a piano that sounds otherwise bright and chimey and perfect and doesn't sustain and would sound great playing Beethoven's Fifth. We can take it and make it do this with two knob turns. Just because you're playing piano doesn't mean that you have to stick with normal piano sounds. There's probably a wider repertoire of patches and tones you can get out of it. The place to start with that is filters, reverbs, and delays. So thank you. Hope you enjoyed these classes.